This is The Balanced Dilemma. We tackle the often uniquely, but not always, female dilemma, managing life, work, family, and self. I'm Maura Carlin.
And I'm Christy Derrico. At The Balanced Dilemma, we speak with women and men to hear their balanced stories. Our guests are entrepreneurs, reinventors, creators, executives, parents, and partners, telling us what we really want to know. How the heck did they manage that? And can you have it all and all at the same time? You know, Maura, we often refer to The Balanced Dilemma as this American woman's life meets how I built this. Our guests have made their own paths and reinvented themselves or have been allies to women achieving these goals. Our guest today will mark the second woman in the military we have interviewed, and their stories are a far cry from Goldie Hawn in Private Benjamin. Colonel Mary Westmoreland, The Balanced Dilemma, episode 65, spoke with us and detailed her career trajectory in the 1970s as a mother and later a widow and how she made that work. I've watched today's guest grow from being a young student to an attorney, having been friends with her father for many years. When we reconnected and I heard her story as part of the JAG Corps, I knew we needed to talk to her. Major Lauren Perone Jones is Vice President and Senior Managing Counsel at Mastercard. After graduating Fordham Law, passing the bar in New York and Connecticut, she moved to Texas with her then fiancé, a first lieutenant in the Army. It was then that she decided to apply to the USAF JAG, Judge Advocacy General's Corps. Boy, that's a tongue twister. This is a great part of her story, and I'm so excited for her to share it with us today. In 2010, while her husband deployed to Afghanistan, Lauren attended officers training, and her career took a path that she was not trained for in law school.
So today, when she's not solving complex legal problems at work, she continues to serve as an Air Force major in the JAG Corps, where she served as a reserve judge advocate general for 14 years. She was also on active orders for the majority of her first few years as an officer. When her husband left the Army in 2015, the family decided to return to the village where she grew up, Mamaroneck, New York, in Westchester County. And just a note that Lauren is speaking with The Balanced Dilemma in her civilian capacity as an individual and not on behalf of the Air Force or any military branch. Major Perone Jones, Lauren, welcome to The Balanced Dilemma.
Thank you so much for having me.
I want to start with how you ended up in the military, because you're not someone who enlisted from high school or college. You weren't in ROTC. Was this part of a path that you saw yourself following?
You know, I think if you talk to any of my friends in high school or even college, whether or not, and ask them whether or not they foresaw this in my career path, I think the majority of them, even my closest friends, would have said, no way. There's no way Lauren would ever join the military. That said, you know, I always respected the military. I do come from a little bit of a military background. My grandfather, my great uncle, I have a series of military officers in my family and enlisted going back, probably back until when they were in Italy, even before they immigrated to the U.S. But it always interested me. I graduated Fordham Law in 2007, and at the time I was dating my husband, who was a firstie, a senior at West Point. And, you know, we were dating and everything was great, but we knew that there was a lot on the horizon with the wars that were in Afghanistan and Iraq, and we wondered a little bit as to where that may take us and where we might go. So we decided to just kind of go along with it. You know, in law school, I was interested in the JAG Corps. I thought it was a very interesting career path. I had wanted to speak with JAG officers for recruiting purposes. At the time, don't ask, don't tell was still a policy for the military. And so a lot of the law schools either didn't proactively advertise when they came to speak with students because of the fact that that policy was still in place. So I felt like it was a little difficult for me to kind of really understand what the JAG Corps was about. But long story short, 2007, graduated law school, entered a job market after passing the bar that was
Passing two bars?
Yes, New York and Connecticut. Yes, exactly. But the job market 2007, 2008 was not the best. It was kind of a depressing place to be in New York at the time. A lot of people were losing jobs. A lot of people I had graduated law school with were
Financial
getting
crisis.
laid off. Exactly. And, you know, now what? At the time, my husband, then fiance, was deployed to Iraq. and he was getting shot at. He was, doing platoon. He was a platoon leader doing patrols in downtown Baghdad, kicking down doors. And I was kind of terrified. I just wanted to look at what was important. So I moved down to Fort Hood to be with him, quickly realized that we were soon moving to Colorado. I was not barred in Texas. I was not going to take the bar in Colorado because we were probably only going to be there 2 years. What was I going to do? I still wanted to practice law. I could not waive in. And so I looked around and said, well, I've always been interested in the JAG Corps, but can I do it? And my husband said, you absolutely can.
So tell us what the JAG Corps really is.
Yeah. It's the Judge Advocate General Corps. It is the team of attorneys for the military. So each military branch has their own JAG Corps. There's an Army JAG Corps, a Navy JAG Corps, Air Force JAG Corps, etc. And we are essentially like in-house counsel for the military in that we advise commanders, we advise generals on a litany of issues. But then there's also the military justice aspect of it. And this is kind of the quote unquote sexy part that is, depicted in A Few Good Men or any of those military dramas. We do play the role, not play, but we are prosecutors, we are defense attorneys, we are judges, and we have our own military justice system. And so that's another aspect of what we do in the JAG Corps. So it's like in-house counsel meets, the regular courthouse.
So curious, you went to the Air Force, not to the Army, where your husband was serving. Was that intentional?
I had looked into the training requirements and a litany of things played into this. Training requirements was one of them because I wanted to just be able to start work as quickly as possible. I felt like I had not been working for a little while as a military spouse. The Air Force training requirements, there was one less component to it than the Army at the time. That's not necessarily the case at the moment. But really, it was the way the Air Force was set up. The Air Force has what are called base level legal offices, and each of those legal offices supports the commander or the base itself. And within that legal office, you cover everything. You have attorneys that are in charge of military justice. You have attorneys that do civil law. You have attorneys that do administrative stuff. It runs the gamut all within that one legal office. So you all work together, and at any given time, you could be working on anything.
Broad-based experience.
Broad-based, yes. Some of the other branches are not set up the same way. For example, I know, and because my husband was in the Army, I had a lot of experience seeing how JAG Corps was set up there. They have more, they may be embedded with a commander. They have the legal assistance center. They have another section that may be dealing with administrative stuff. And so you're not one legal office together in the same way that the Air Force is. And that interested me.
So what is a military JD network, a military spousal JD network, where most of the people, spouses of people who are in the service?
Yeah. So Military Spouse JD Network is a network that was founded back in the early 2010 time period. I think
so. About when you were starting,
about when I was becoming a military spouse. And at the time, I actually don't even know how I got looped into the network. I think it was from another military officer that I had known. A group of military spouses came together and realized that spouses of military members were severely disadvantaged in the legal career field, in that we could not waive in to the bars in the different states as we moved around the country.
I think that we should make clear that lawyers after graduating law school take a bar exam, and it's jurisdiction sensitive. So if you've taken the New York bar and the Connecticut bar, you can practice law in New York and Connecticut, but can't necessarily go to Texas and just hang out a shingle.
Correct. And each state, right, has their own laws, rules, regulations as to how you can become barred in that state. So it's controlled by each state, and it's not federally controlled. And so we realized that this was a big gap. This was a problem for military spouses that were attorneys. Severely.
And was this primarily women?
Mostly women, yeah, especially at the time. I don't know if I'm sure the dynamic has changed a bit at the moment, but I think it's still safe to say that the majority of military spouses tend to be women. But there's a big shift happening now, actually.
And you did mention to me that other certifications like doctors and teachers did not have the same problem. It was exclusive to JD's lawyers.
Right. A lot of them could, from what I understood, could just apply to have their licenses transferred. They didn't necessarily have to take a whole exam like we would have to take the bar. Some states would allow you to waive in if you had been actively practicing in a state for a certain period of time and were in good standing. But it's hard to actively practice in a state for 5 years when you're moving every 2 to 3. How do you do that, right? So that was an issue. So
tell us about what you achieved with this group.
Yeah, so I was contacted by the group early on, and I was identified as one of the attorneys that was barred in New York. And so the way that the powers that be that had organized this group had decided to move forward was to have the attorneys that had been barred in each state kind of advocate in the state in which they were barred to have that state allow for military spouses to waive in. So I was already licensed. I was barred in New York. I didn't need to be waived into New York, but that put me in a position to be part of this letter writing campaigns, put my name on things, and try to help push that forward. In the meantime, other spouses who were barred in other states were obviously petitioning those states. So one by one, these states slowly adopted rules and laws, not laws, but rules to allow attorneys to waive in to the state if they were in the state pursuant to a spouse's military orders, and they were also in good standing in at least one other
And when
state.
we looked this up, when we spoke, it seems like about 44 states now allow these spouses to waive in. And just to be clear, when you're a member of the bar, you can go to court and things of that nature. And if you don't have that licensing, you cannot go to court or do certain other things as an attorney.
Do you think this is perhaps, a way to keep the female military spouses happy and keep them productive?
I think over the course of the years, and like I said, I've been a military spouse since I married my husband, so I've been part of it for well over a decade now. Even though he's no longer in and I'm no longer a spouse, I'm still aware, I have a sense of what's going on. There has been an increased focus on making sure that military spouses have resources available for them from employment. Traditionally, I think a lot of military spouses were not necessarily seen as having professional careers necessarily, for better or worse. And I think that's probably true in general. And, it's more and more dual income households now than there were even 20 years ago.
Do you see that change that, at a time, the military sort of figured you had a young man with a stay-at-home spouse?
Yeah.
Is that still the case, or has it changed?
I think just like in the civilian world, it's case by case, manager by manager, right? There's a culture, an overarching culture that says one thing and tries to help and facilitate dual income, but then there's all the underlying effects of it and what happens at the lower levels with the managers and all of that. I think it just changes from person to person. So,
right. And this is proven in the data. When we interviewed the Colonel Westmoreland, it was a different environment when she was in the military. And now we see much more dual income households and the need for childcare and things of that nature. And
you have some interesting statistics about childcare
I know.
in the military, and you can't find them.
No, I
No, you
can. This I found it quite amazing. Did you know the Department of Defense operates the largest employer-sponsored child care program in the United States, serving approximately 200,000 children and employing over 23,000 child care workers at an annual cost of over $1 billion. And yet, more than 8,000 children at the time of this article, which was 2019, more than 8,000 children of sailors and 3,000 of airmen were on the Department of Defense wait list for on-base child care.
Right, because I read that in 2020, the Department of Defense could only meet 78% of the child care needs. And, that women seem to be more stressed out from this. There's a Blue Star Family report finding that 44% of female service members reported a lack of child care giving them stress, whereas only 20% of male service members with children felt that way.
I was looking for this statistic, and I just laid my eyes on it. Today, there are almost twice as many dual military married couples and single parents serving on active duty compared with 1985. So this is a growing situation, and the military seems to be listening and trying to make changes. I mean, it mirrors society in general. I think we could all agree childcare is a problem whether you're in the military or not.
Absolutely. I think it's systemic. It's a systemic problem in our country as a whole. And so I think it's just the military is supposed to reflect our country. I think, unfortunately, this is one of the areas in which it is absolutely doing that.
So were you able to take advantage or use military childcare when you were in full active service?
So when my husband was still in the Army and we lived out in Washington State, that's when my first child was born in 2013. I was able to utilize military childcare. We had the benefit of being at one of the larger bases, it's Joint Base Lewis McChord, and there were several childcare centers on those bases. So there was more availability of resources, and they had also worked with local childcare providers. For the most of the time we were out there, my daughter actually went to a private child care center, and they helped supplement. They paid a portion of it. Now, granted, I was out of pocket more than I would have been had she been on base, but I was happy to do that. We were, dual income, and I just wanted assistance in trying to figure out the child care. Now, mind you have to remember most of these active duty members live nowhere near family either. That said, even when I live near family, I don't always have help, but it's not even an option or a consideration. So that's another factor there, is that I didn't even know where to begin to look.
And I imagine these childcare issues mirror another problem. Facilities have wait lists. We hear stories of women being
Childcare
pregnant.
deserts, too.
That's right, and putting their names on lists. So if you're moving and only in a state for a short period of time, a wait list might be childcare prohibitive for you.
Absolutely.
But what was an issue overseas?
Yeah,
That's exactly what I was going to ask about. I love this story. Tell us how you figured it out.
Yeah, well, I mean, as a reservist, I think I have a unique challenge, even compared to active duty, in that I'm only entitled to leverage military assistance with childcare if I'm on more permanent orders. And what does permanent mean? Well, I mean, for example, I went overseas once to Germany. I was there for over 90 days. That did not necessarily qualify me to be able to use the on-base facilities because we were overseas. Had I been stateside, it might have been a different story. So my husband has a job here in New York and, is really crazy busy as well, and can't necessarily pull the full weight of childcare if I'm gone for that period of time. So we have an au pair. And we decided to uproot everybody and move them to Germany for the summer. It was on our own dime. The military did not move us because we were just there for a shorter period of time. But that made the most sense for me at the time. It made more sense for me to move everybody over there, rent an apartment off base, and, have them stay there for as long as they could within the rules and regulations and parameters of our agreement with the German government. And that's how we solved that. But not everybody has that. Not everybody has an au pair that they can bring with them, right?
And this brings up another story we were talking about during COVID. There was a little snafu with J1 visas, and those are the visas that bring au pairs to this country. And you pointed out a little footnote that I wasn't aware of. What happened to you?
Yeah, this was actually a very stressful situation. During 2020, J1 visas were severely restricted. J1 visas are the visas that are used for bringing au pairs into the country. And there was a severe lockdown on the number of J1 visas that were issued. So essentially, you could not get new au pairs into the country. They did have exceptions to this J1 visa ban if you matched with an au pair and you were what was considered an essential worker, rightfully so. Police, firemen, doctors, they could get au pairs coming over, and they had an exception to this. One of the things that was not an exception in this J1 visa ban was military. So military was not included in the first responders exception. Meanwhile, I was still 100% expected to put on my uniform and go report to the base for up to 2 weeks at a time. In fact, I did longer than that at one point because there were still issues with visas and COVID going on when we had the Afghan refugees come back to the base here in New Jersey. So what did you do? It was tough.
Right.
I called my dad. I pieced it together.
Right.
My husband was able to kind of work from home a little bit more than he normally does. My youngest was not yet born, so that was very helpful. He's now 2.5, so my kids were in school, and he was able to kind of cobble it together. But it was very stressful. I mean, we made it work, but it was not easy at all.
I will say, I guess we helped our country because my daughter's being stuck at home with college going, virtual. They worked for families that got stuck in this quagmire and helped out. So it gave them a job, and they had childcare, and probably much more qualified at times than they would have gotten. But it wasn't a good time for parents.
Yes, it was
the
tough
COVID
all around for sure.
And we can't ignore the fact that while you're a reservist, you have another full-time gig.
Yes.
Tell us about that, because that's equally as impressive.
Yeah, I am a senior managing counsel at Mastercard, and I manage some attorneys there, and we primarily deal with all the legal relationships between Mastercard and the U.S.-based financial institutions, the majority of those banks. And so that's what I do in my day job.
How do they handle it when you have to leave to, report?
They're great. I tell them I have orders, I send them my orders, and that's it. There's no problem there.
And they're not bothering you when you're away. Can you handle this? Or I don't know how it works.
Yeah, they're not bothering me. That said, the personality that I am, of course, I'm checking my email, and I don't want to leave anybody kind of in the lurch. They are great about telling me that I to focus on what I need to focus on. I do log on sometimes and just try to make sure that I'm not leaving anything, unanswered or whatnot. But they're pretty good about it, yeah.
So this brings up a big question I have about cross-pollination. How has the skills you've learned in the military facilitated you as a mother with your children and also at work?
Yeah. You'd be surprised. There's moments in which I'm like, wow, I learned this in the Air Force, and here I am pulling it in. It pops up at odd places. I do have to say, as being a mother, I remember laughing with my husband. My oldest, when she was born, was quite a difficult baby. She was colic. She did not sleep through the night until she was about 1.5 years old. It was challenging. And I remember having very little sleep and just being exhausted. And I looked at him and I said, the best training I've had for this was when I went down and, went to commissioned officer training down with the Air Force. I just remember being so tired during that whole experience. And I just reached back to that. And I was like, I could do it then. I can do it now. It'll be fine.
Learning how to sleep anytime you have the chance.
Yes, exactly. Just trying to fall asleep when you can.
Functioning without
right.
sleep.
Yes.
And
exactly.
in the corporate world, any skills that you've employed?
The military is really great about giving ongoing training to not only their military members, but also attorneys. And I had the great opportunity to attend the Air Force cybersecurity law course a number of years ago. And obviously that's been a hot topic as of late. I've been able to reach back from that experience. A lot of experience with regard to international sanction situations that have come up that I don't necessarily deal with in the role that I'm currently in, but I've had people reach out to me because they're, oh, let me ask Lauren. She may actually know this, even though it's not necessarily in my area. So it comes up. And then the leadership part of it, I think, is more the more obvious one.
So let's just tackle the leadership. Surely you learn things about leading people from the military that you employ in corporate life. What are some of those lessons or skills that you picked up?
Leading by example, I think, is really important. I think, you can't, it can't be do as I say, not as I do. And that can go both ways, not even necessarily, for lack of a better term, being down in the trenches with your people. It's also setting an example that, it's okay that you need to take a moment to bring your child to the doctor. It's okay that, you're sick today and you need a sick day. I'm a workaholic. It's very hard for me to take a sick day, but there are moments that I tell myself, you know what, I'm going to take the sick day because I would not be happy if someone on my team felt that they couldn't take a sick day. And so it's moments like that I think are almost hidden moments of leadership.
Do you sometimes find that you give more grace to the people who are working with you or for you than to yourself?
Oh, absolutely. 100%.
Maura's very good at diagnosing things like that.
100%. In fact, I think being a leader has forced me to actually look at myself a little bit more and give myself more grace because of that, because I want to set that example.
I imagine it also helped you in talking to and dealing with people at different levels from different backgrounds. Tell us about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the military, as we all know, military members run the gamut. You have everything from the kid that just graduated high school and enlisted the day after, or to, someone with 3 degrees and doctorates and, whatever, knows everything about everything. And one minute I could be in a room speaking with a general who is extremely educated and came from all this education and background, and the next moment I could be speaking with someone who has never left, you know, his home state until now, and doesn't even, you know, didn't even have a passport until he got, you know, into the military. So, you know, you learn a lot about people. Having grown up here in Westchester, I feel like sometimes we live in a little bit of a bubble in some ways. In other ways, we are exposed to a lot of things here. But, you know, it blew my mind when I lived in the middle of Oklahoma, and there were people who had never been to New York City, right? But I had never been to Oklahoma on the flip side of it. So I learned so much about this country and about all the different types of people and places that we have within this country.
Is there one overarching theme that you found meeting people from all over the country?
I think it's, you know, that old adage that don't judge anyone until you've walked a mile in their shoes. I think in this current political environment, I think that's really important. I think people need to, there's so much hate and so much going on right now around us everywhere. I think people need to take a step back and realize that their experience is not the experience of the person next to them. And so the less you interact with those other people, the less you understand where they're coming from, the less, you know, you can ever work together. And I think that that is something that I learned and opened my eyes moving all over the country in ways that I didn't really expect.
Now, let's go into a military household. What is the division of labor in your home? We use phrases like hidden workload, mental, cognitive load, labor. How did this work in your household?
Lead parent.
Yes, lead parent.
As she sighs.
I love my husband. He does a lot. He does a lot. That said, I think I almost set myself up for failure in some ways as a military spouse, because he was the one that could deploy at any moment. So I was the one that needed to know exactly what needed to happen with every bill, with every whatever, with the pediatrician appointments, with what was going on and tracking and monitoring everything. So I kind of, as a military spouse, overtook all of those things. When he got out of the military, I kind of retained them.
Because he's the military spouse now.
He's the military spouse now, yes. But I still kind of manage everything. And when I leave lists upon lists upon lists and a lot of instructions. But, you know, he's great. He'll come home, he'll make dinner, he'll do, you know, he does his part for sure.
But you're still delegating?
In a lot of
planning.
ways, yes. yes. But I think, you know, some of that also comes from the culture, right? In the sense that no matter how much we say women can do just as much as men can, or they can do anything, we also have to look at the culture of where the men are also working and realize that you also have to give the men that same grace if you want them to be able to step up, right? It's almost not acceptable for him to say that he has to bring the kid to the pediatrician, right? I'm not saying that his boss directly, you know, this is no comment on exactly how that's going, but there needs to be that adjustment. I think that's the next step that really needs to happen, right? We've been trying really hard to give women the ability to balance it all, but instead of giving it all to them to balance, we have to also give men the ability to help balance. And I think that that's where...
I know what Maura's going to ask.
No, you don't.
But do they have paternity leave in the military?
Oh, you did know what I was going to ask.
Yes, they do. When my daughter was born, it was not very long. It was 2 weeks, and that was our first child. And I was like deer in the headlights. Just, I don't know what to do, and no family around. Right, we're out on the West Coast, and that was tough. They have now expanded the paternity leave. It's not necessarily on par, I don't think, with what you'll find in the civilian world, but there has been movement.
Well, your husband is in the civilian world. Did he take paternity leave with children 2 and 3?
Yes, he did. Did he take the full amount he was allocated? No. Because there's, not that anybody said he couldn't, right? But there's this whole... is it going to look okay for me to do it?
Perception, and this concern that you'll be shown to be not as committed. And that's a very real concern for men, and particularly in a financial world.
And we've addressed this, and we're trying to take it head on. Allowing men to take leave, as you've pointed out, giving them grace on these issues of pediatrician and things like that, allows everyone to take leave. It doesn't always make it a woman-centric issue.
It normalizes family as being part of your life, and showing, you know, there's a whole movement about mothering openly, but it really should be parenting openly for men as well. Should we go to balance, Christy?
Go ahead.
Do you believe in balance, or do you believe in integration? You've used both terms in some of the stuff I've seen you quoted in.
Yeah, I think it's more of an integration. I think that's the way that I'm able to manage and cope with that without it becoming overwhelming. I feel like balance in my mind requires me to kind of balance it all out, and it's never going to balance out evenly. I just have to be able to find a way to integrate it so that it works for me.
Well, do you believe you can have it all and all at the same time?
I think you can. I think you can with the right resources, right?
So
and
tell
not
us
everybody
how.
has those resources.
So tell us what it takes.
It takes a village. It truly does, right? It takes support from your spouse if you're fortunate enough to have one, or a partner of some sort. You cannot do it all yourself. That is absolutely certain. I outsource where I can, and I'm privileged enough to be able to do that. I have somebody helping me clean my home. There's no way I could keep the house the way I wanted if I was doing all that I was doing. My children have to give me some amount of grace as well. I can't be at every single thing. I missed my son's camp show the other night. We had a talk about it. He was okay, and I watched the video. And I think that's good for him too. Like, he learns and grows from it. So I think it requires everybody to give each other grace, and everybody to realize what's truly important and to be there for those important moments, but also understand that you can't be there for everything.
I think I know the answer to this from your story, but how do you feel about two working parents having equal careers at the same time? Do you think that's possible?
Demanding.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's possible with the right help, right? I'd say my husband and we're fairly equal as far as income levels and what we bring to the table at our careers, our levels at our jobs. But it's possible. You just have to be able to give each other grace and to find those ways to ask for help and not be afraid to ask for help when you need it.
Have you encountered positive mentors on this path that you've taken in the military?
Yes, I have. I've encountered great people. I've also encountered people that have tried to shut me down. Not necessarily me specifically. But whenever I've encountered the latter of the two, I've always had people that I could reach out to that could bring me back to, making me realize that this is possible and you can do it. You just need the support.
And these mentors, have they been women, men, both?
In the military, I'd say it's been mostly men. And I don't know if that's just because the military is mostly men. I've also had mostly men in the military be the ones that have caused me to second guess myself as far as whether or not I can juggle it all. I'd say in the civilian world, it's been mostly women. I've had a lot of really wonderful women that have been mentors to me, particularly at Mastercard, I have to say. And I've been very lucky in that regard.
How do you feel about putting motherhood on one's resume or LinkedIn?
A lot of people say that you should never in a first interview let someone know if you have children or not. I am not shy about it. You're going to hire me, you're going to get all of me, and I'm going to be upfront about who I am and what that comes with. I don't think it's a bad thing to make it known on LinkedIn. I don't know that I necessarily put like the years, like you do on a resume, but you can put it of note. I personally think moms know how to multitask more than anybody I've ever met and are very efficient with their time. I shouldn't just say moms, parents in general. And so, I think if you can have a parent that can juggle it all, then that's great. And they're capable of so much.
And would you recommend a military career to young women and thinking of their working future?
Absolutely. I have learned so much about myself. I feel like I am so much stronger for my time in the military. The military obviously has its problems and its issues just like anywhere else. And there are some challenges that I think are unique to women in the military that, we didn't really necessarily get into today. But I think, there is a concerted effort to change those things and to make things better and to not have there be pushback on women in the military.
Well, there are statistics about there being greater attrition of women from the military, and they don't make it to the higher ranks. Do you see why that happens, and can you explain it to us?
Well, I think there's a number of reasons. I think a lot of the studies will point to there being more than one reason. Some of it has to do with culture. I think that has been, in my time, I've noticed a shift, right? Some of it has to do with childcare, like we discussed, and just trying to juggle and balance it all. There's obviously been some concerns about sexual assault in the military that also affect men and not just women. So I think that's just a cultural aspect that is also been worked on. I don't think they have the answers yet. I don't think anybody has the answers, and I think you'll see that anywhere you go. But I think that those challenges are there, and you just have to know how to know yourself and know how you can overcome those challenges.
And I think getting rid of waist taping, I read about.
Tell us about that.
Yes, what is waist taping?
So you're required to be fit to be in the military, right? And, it's one of the few jobs that they can require that of you, because obviously it's physically demanding. You have to be able to possibly pick up a weapon or run or whatever it is. They used to tape your waist, like measure your waist, and that was part of your PT, your fitness requirement. And if you fell outside of certain measurements pursuant to your height and whatnot, you could potentially get discharged or be put on some alternative plan. That was a challenge for a lot of people, especially women who had just had children. When I had my first child, I had to take my first PT test 6 months after giving birth.
Ooh.
I was still breastfeeding. It was my first. I mean, it takes 3 months just to recover from giving birth, let alone trying to now run. That was tough. The Air Force changed that now, and I am so grateful for that, because I look back and that was one of those moments where I thought I was failing because it was so hard. I did it, but it was hard.
Fail.
Yeah, exactly.
What is something that you would tell your 25-year-old self that you didn't know at the time?
It's going to be okay. Yeah. That was tough for me. Graduating law school and not knowing whether or not I was going to have a career after having worked so hard to get into college and law school and pass the bar. And now all of a sudden I had law school loans and it felt like no job and no prospects. I think, just telling myself it's going to be okay. You'll get there.
Right. This is true.
It has been wonderful talking to you. I'm
Thank
so
you.
glad we got to meet. I've been hearing about you for a while.
Oh,
Thank you.
one little tidbit that we should close on. Tell us about your necklace.
Oh, my husband bought this for me. It has Athena on it. And Athena is near and dear to our entire family because Athena is the mascot for my college, which was Bryn Mawr College, all women's college outside of Philadelphia, because she's the goddess of wisdom. But she's also the mascot for West Point because Athena is the goddess of strategic war. And so Athena holds a very important place in our family's heart. So
that's wonderful.
And on that note, thank you so much for joining us,
Thank
Major.
you. Thank you.
It's been wonderful having you.
Thanks.
Please follow us, listen to us, and rate us on our platforms, Spotify, Apple, and our website, thebalanceddilemma.com, where you can also subscribe to our newsletter and email us your suggestions. There's no cost, but it means a lot to us.